On the 17th, the fleet anchored abreast 4 mud batteries, which defended a town, so entirely surrounded with wood that it was impossible to form any idea of its size. The weather was very hazy, with hard squalls of rain. The Ladrones remained perfectly quiet for 2 days. On the 3rd day the forts commenced a brisk fire for several hours. The Ladrones did not return a single shot, but weighed in the night and dropped down the river. The reasons they gave for not attacking the town or returning the fire were that Joss had not promised them success. They are very superstitious and consult their idol on all occasions. If his omens are good, they will undertake the most daring enterprises. The fleet now anchored opposite the ruins of the town where the women had been made prisoners. Here we remained 5 or 6 days, during which time about 100 of the women were ransomed. The remainder were offered for sale amongst the Ladrones for $40 each. The woman is considered the lawful wife of the purchaser, who would be put to death if he discarded her. Several of them leaped overboard and drowned themselves, rather than submit to such infamous degradation. The fleet then weighed and made sail down the river to receive the ransom from the town before mentioned. As we passed the hill, they fired several shots at us, but without effect. The Ladrones were much exasperated and determined to revenge themselves. They dropped out of reach of their shot and anchored. Every junk sent about 100 men each on shore to cut paddy and destroy their orange groves, which was most effectually performed for several miles down the river. During our stay here they received information of 9 boats lying up a creek, laden with paddy. Boats were immediately dispatched after them. Next morning these boats were brought to the fleet. 10 or 12 men were taken in them. As these had made no resistance, the chief said he would allow them to become Ladrones if they agreed to take the usual oaths before Joss. 3 or 4 of them refused to comply, for which they were punished in the following cruel manner. Their hands were tied behind their back, a rope from the masthead rove through their arms, and hoisted 3 or 4 feet from the deck, and 5 or 6 men flogged them with 3 rattans twisted together till they were apparently dead, then hoisted them up to the masthead and left them hanging nearly an hour, then lowered them down and repeated the punishment till they died or complied with the oath. October the 20th, in the night, an express boat came with information that a large mandarine fleet was proceeding up the river to attack us. The chief immediately weighed with 50 of the largest vessels and sailed down the river to meet them. About 1 in the morning they commenced a heavy fire till daylight, when an express was sent for the remainder of the fleet to join them. About an hour after, a counter order to anchor came, the mandarine fleet having run. 2 or 3 hours afterwards the chief returned with 3 captured vessels in tow, having sunk 2, and 83 sail made their escape. The admiral of the mandarines blew his vessel up by throwing a lighted match into the magazine as the Ladrones were boarding her. She ran on shore, and they succeeded in getting 20 of her guns. In this action very few prisoners were taken. The men belonging to the captured vessels drowned themselves, as they were sure of suffering a lingering and cruel death if taken after making resistance. The admiral left the fleet in charge of his brother, the second in command, and proceeded with his own vessel towards Lantow. The fleet remained in this river, cutting paddy and getting the necessary supplies. On the 28th of October I received a letter from Captain K, brought by a fisherman, who had told him he would get us all back for $3,000. He advised me to offer 3,000, and if not accepted, extend it to 4, but not farther, as it was bad policy to offer much at first, at the same time assuring me we should be liberated, let the ransom be what it would. I offered the chief the 3,000, which he disdainfully refused, saying he was not to be played with, and unless they sent $10,000 and 2 large guns with several casks of gunpowder, he would soon put us all to death. I wrote to Captain K and informed him of the chief's determination, requesting, if an opportunity offered, to send us a shift of clothes, for which it may be easily imagined we were much distressed, having been 7 weeks without a shift, although constantly exposed to the weather, and of course frequently wet. On the 1st of November the fleet sailed up a narrow river and anchored at night within 2 miles of a town called Little Whampoa. In front of it was a small fort, and several mandarine vessels lying in the harbour. The chief sent the interpreter to me, saying I must order my men to make cartridges and clean their muskets, ready to go on shore in the morning. I assured the interpreter I should give the men no such orders, that they must please themselves. Soon after the chief came on board, threatening to put us all to a cruel death if we refused to obey his orders. For my own part I remained determined, and advised the men not to comply, as I thought by making ourselves useful we should be accounted too valuable. A few hours afterwards he sent to me again, saying that if myself and the quartermaster would assist them at the great guns, that if also the rest of the men went on shore and succeeded in taking the place, he would then take the money offered for our ransom and give them $20 for every Chinaman's head they cut off. To these proposals we cheerfully acceded, in hopes of facilitating our deliverance. Early in the morning the forces intended for landing were assembled in rowboats, amounting in the whole to 3,000 or 4,000 men. The largest vessels weighed and hauled in shore to cover the landing of the forces and attack the fort and mandarine vessels. About 9 o'clock the action commenced, and continued with great spirit for nearly an hour, when the walls of the fort gave way, and the men retreated in the greatest confusion. The mandarine vessels still continued firing, having blocked up the entrance of the harbour to prevent the Ladrone boats entering. At this the Ladrones were much exasperated, and about 300 of them swam on shore, with a short sword lashed close under each arm. They then ran along the banks of the river till they came abreast of the vessels, and then swam off again and boarded them. The Chinese, thus attacked, leaped overboard, and endeavoured to reach the opposite shore. The Ladrones followed, and cut the greater number of them to pieces in the water. They next towed the vessels out of the harbour, and attacked the town with increased fury. The inhabitants fought about a quarter of an hour, and then retreated to an adjacent hill, from which they were soon driven with great slaughter. After this the Ladrones returned and plundered the town, every boat leaving it when laden. The Chinese on the hills, perceiving most of the boats were off, rallied and retook the town, after killing near 200 Ladrones. One of my men was unfortunately lost in this dreadful massacre. The Ladrones landed a second time, drove the Chinese out of the town, then reduced it to ashes, and put all their prisoners to death, without regarding either age or sex. I must not omit to mention a most horrid, though ludicrous, circumstance which happened at this place. The Ladrones were paid by their chief $10 for every Chinaman's head they produced. One of my men, turning the corner of a street, was met by a Ladrone running furiously after a Chinese. He had a drawn sword in his hand, and 2 Chinaman's heads which he had cut off, tied by their tails, and slung round his neck. I was witness myself to some of them producing 5 or 6 to obtain payment. On the 4th of November an order arrived from the Admiral for the fleet to proceed immediately to Lantow, where he was lying with only 2 vessels, and 3 Portuguese ships and a brig constantly annoying him. Several sail of mandarine vessels were daily expected. The fleet weighed and proceeded towards Lantow. On passing the island of Lintin, 3 ships and a brig gave chase to us. The Ladrones prepared to board, but night closing we lost sight of them. I am convinced they altered their course and stood from us. These vessels were in the pay of the Chinese government, and styled themselves the Invincible Squadron, cruising in the river Tigris to annihilate the Ladrones. On the 5th in the morning the Red Squadron anchored in a bay under Lantow. The Black Squadron stood to the eastward. In this bay they hauled several of their vessels on shore to bream their bottoms and repair them. In the afternoon of the 8th of November 4 ships, a brig and a schooner, came off the mouth of the bay. At first the pirates were much alarmed, supposing them to be English vessels come to rescue us. Some of them threatened to hang us to the masthead for them to fire at, and with much difficulty we persuaded them that they were Portuguese. The Ladrones had only 7 junks in a fit state for action. These they hauled outside, and moored them head and stern across the bay, and manned all the boats belonging to the repairing vessels ready for boarding. The Portuguese, observing these manoeuvres, hove to, and communicated by boats. Soon afterwards they made sail, each ship firing her broadside as she passed, but without effect, the shot falling far short. The Ladrones did not return a single shot, but waved their colours and threw up rockets to induce them to come further in, which they might easily have done, the outside junks lying in 4 fathoms water, which I sounded myself. Though the Portuguese in their letters to Macao lamented there was not sufficient water for them to engage close